Here are 17 reasons that you should try Draw Steel, and one reason that if it applies to you, you probably shouldn't bother. I'm gonna let you know which of these 17 features is my absolute favorite and why it sums up the entire design philosophy of Draw Steel. I read both Draw Steel books from cover to cover, and I've picked out what I think are the coolest features from both a player and a GM perspective. And if you aren't convinced to try this game for yourself, then at the very least you should steal a couple of these systems and bring them back to the system of your choice, because there are a few things in here that could be used to make pretty much any system better. Speaking of resources that can be used in any system, we're also going to go over a few ways that the sponsor of today's video, Describe, can be used to make your first experience with Draw Steel even better. Welcome to the table. I'm Kelly, and I'm here to tell you that Ginny D isn't the only one that carries a sword. And today, I'm going to draw steel. You see what I did there? Should put that away before I hurt myself. If everything went according to plan, then Draw Steel is out right now, and you should try it. And if Draw Steel isn't out, then this is embarrassing, but let's assume that future Kelly got the dates right and MCDM's release went out on schedule. In Draw Steel, there are tons of different ways to really meaningfully customize your character. Your character is the result of an ancestry, a culture, a career, a class, sometimes a kit, and optionally a complication. And that's where we're starting because it's so cool. Character complications are an optional feature, but they'll take your character to another level. Complications are a narrative-inspired character feature that give you a mechanical benefit and a drawback. They're a character flaw that's mechanically represented in the game, which is so cool. For example, Elemental Inside. An evil mage was summoning an elemental, and in order to protect the ones you love, you absorb the elemental. You get the benefits of increased stamina, but the drawback is that when you have the dying condition, the elemental takes control of your body and attempts to kill the nearest creature, regardless of whether they're an enemy or an ally. How cool is that? There are tons of different ones in the book, and they have varying levels of risk and reward, so you can decide how much you want to gamble. This is actually my favorite feature, and I think it perfectly encapsulates the design philosophy of Draw Steel, which is you can and are encouraged to do anything you want narratively to tell a great story, like just writing a character flaw into your backstory. But if you want robust mechanics to support that narrative feature, they're probably in this book and you have the option to use them. The GM tools that we'll cover in the second half of the video are very much like this as well. But this game doesn't just add new features, it also tweaks familiar ones, adding a new twist to make them more interesting. Ancestry, or species, or race is something we're all familiar with in TTRPGs, but Draw Steel has an interesting twist on it with an ancestry point system. There are all the familiar ancestries that we're used to from D&D and similar games, but they allow for more unique builds. Instead of every person from an ancestry having the same bonuses, you get to buy traits with points. Every ancestry has a signature bonus, which everyone gets, and then you have 3 points to buy traits from a list. The result is that you could have an entire party of high elves and they could all have different traits. Throughout the whole character creation process, there's a lot of guidance, not just in how to create a character mechanically, but also how to create a character backstory that fits within the game. And the next feature is a great example of that. These are similar to backgrounds in D&D, but have way more narrative guidance. Draw Steel heavily recommends that you play an adventurer. Just like in D&D and other similar games, the mechanics support a story about characters that go on adventures and get rewards for completing deeds. A career is the job you did before becoming an adventurer. The careers section in the book has tons of career options that all give you some interesting skills and benefits. But unlike other systems that I've seen, they also give you inspiration for why your character put their career behind them and chose a life of adventuring instead. They all include some really great fodder for GMs to bring those backstory elements into the game. It's really fun to read through all the tables, but I like this one from the politician career. Self-serving. You used your skills to collect incriminating or scandalous information about your opponents to blackmail them. A rival got one step ahead of you and stole your book of dirty secrets, but instead of using it against you, they gave you an opportunity to leave the world of politics behind. Saved from public humiliation, you now use your skills for the greater good. So much juicy backstory fodder in one little part of the character creation process. A Along with a career, you also develop a culture that'll give you some skills and languages. Instead of listing a bunch of different cultures here, they give you some easy tools to build your own. Basically, you pick different elements of the culture, like whether it was a wilderness-based or urban-based culture, the organization structure, like whether it was an anarchy or a communal organization, and what your upbringing was like. It's a neat way to distill a significant world-building task down to a few prompts that should give you just enough to flavor your character and give your GM something to work with. There are 9 classes in Draw Steel. Some are martial focused, some are magic focused, and some lie in the middle. But all of them have lots of customization options, especially the ones that use kits, which we'll go over in a second. I'm gonna list all the classes with the D&D class that they're closest to because most of you watching this are familiar with D&D, but they're absolutely not just D&D clones, they all feel fresh and unique. The Censor is closest to a Paladin, it's the half-caster Holy Enforcer class. The Conduit is kind of like a cleric, but they're a full caster. The Elementalist is kind of like a druid, they wield elemental powers and have a shape change ability. The Fury is closest to a Barbarian, except they do some cool things with mobility. The Null is closest to a Monk, but they also get psionics. The Shadow is closest to a Rogue, but they also get magic. The Tactician is closest to a Battlemaster fighter, but with a lot more out-of-combat abilities as well. And the Talent is kind of like a psionic sorcerer with chronomancy powers and the wards of a rune knight. In other words, not really like a D&D class at all. And the Troubadour is closest to a bard, but with a lot more freedom as to what kind of bard you are. Like I mentioned, some of these classes get even more modularity because they get to use kits. Kits are your weapon and armor, and they give you certain abilities as well. The Censor, Fury, Shadow, Tactician, and Troubadour get to use kits. In other words, the full casters don't get kits. Kits are really cool because it means your tankiness can be determined by your kit, not your class. Meaning that you can be a tanky Troubadour if you want. You can wear heavy armor and carry a shield and stand at the front taking hit after hit as you lay down hit after hit on that sick lyre.
If we do this, there's gonna be 2 hits. Me hitting you and Kid Rock's Ball with the Ball playing in the background. Durs, you have that queued up, right? Yep.
But before we talk about the headlining feature of Draw Steel, which is that every attack hits, and all the incredible GM resources that it provides, I want to show you how you can use the sponsor of today's video, Describe, to enhance the free Draw Steel adventure called Road to Broadhurst. Road to Broadhurst is available for free from the MCDM website and leads directly into the official starter set, the Delian Tomb. I've linked everything down below. It comes with lots of assets, but you can make it even better by using music, sound effects, and descriptions from Describe. I've actually made a collection for you to use while running the starter adventure, and you can use the code PowerWordSpill to get an extended 30-day free trial so you can try it for free. All of that is also linked down in the description. For those of you who aren't familiar, Describe has a bunch of different resources to help you run any TTRPG. They have descriptions that you can read verbatim or use as inspiration for building characters and worlds. They also have Opus, which is their music and sound effects platform. Opus allows you to access over 7,000 music, ambience, and sound effects tracks from Michael Gelfi Studios. And it gives you the tools to make sure that every song and sound effect is organized and easily accessible exactly at the right moment. So when something dramatic happens at the table, you can quickly change the music to fit the mood, which will make your game feel that much more cinematic. Describe has also just launched a brand new and heavily requested feature. You can now upload your own music and sound effects if your favorite song isn't available in their library. 200 megabytes of storage is included already, with the option to expand it. Head to the link down in the description and use the code PowerWordSpill to enhance your first Draw Steel adventure. Alright, now let's talk about why this game is fundamentally different than D&D in its design philosophy. I know I said complications were my favorite thing in here, but I think this might actually be it. Okay, it's a 2-way tie between those 2 things. Actually, it's like a 4-way tie between those 2 things and 2 other things. There are just so many good things. Sorry, I'm just really excited. Every class gets a heroic resource that you can spend to do extra cool and extra powerful abilities. To explain how you get your heroic resource and why they're so cool, we need to first explain another player resource called victories. You earn victories by winning encounters, including non-combat encounters, meaning that even if you talk your way out of a fight, you could still earn victories. You continue to earn victories until you take a respite, which is a long rest. At that point, your victories get converted to XP and it goes to towards your level advancing. At the start of a combat encounter, you get a number of heroic resources equal to the number of victories you have. Then you get additional heroic resource points at the start of your turn. The amount varies by class. What this means is that the longer you go without a rest, the more powerful you get. That fundamentally changes the game. This isn't a game of tightly clutching your precious resources as they dwindle and trying to get 8 hours of sleep as soon as possible. This is a game about gambling on whether you can push on in another encounter to stack up those sweet, sweet victories before you run out of recoveries and stamina. It also means that the later rounds of combat aren't reduced to flinging cantrips back and forth. You still get to do something cool on every turn. But if you thought it was just the players that get a special resource that power their extra cool, extra powerful abilities, then you'd be sorely mistaken. Which is totally fair because you probably haven't read the rules. Just like heroic resources, the GM also collects a resource, except it's called Malice. The GM gets Malice at the start of each combat encounter and at the start of each round of combat. They can spend Malice to power and enhance special monster abilities. At the end of the combat encounter, any unused Malice is lost, so don't be afraid to spend big. Whether you're a player spending a heroic resource to do something, or the GM spending Malice, whatever you spend it on is guaranteed to affect the encounter, because in this game, attacks can't miss. There's no rolling to hit and then wasting your turn when you roll a miss. Every attack hits, but you're rolling to see how effective it is. This is a 2d10 system, so when you make an attack roll, you roll 2d10 and the result will either be tier 1, tier 2, or tier 3. Tier 1 is 11 or lower, tier 2 is 12 to 16, and tier 3 is 17 and above. Getting a higher tier result will do more damage and also may unlock other effects on the attack. This tiered result system is the core mechanic of the game, but another feature that's core that might be a con for some is that the setting and lore is built into the game and very prevalent throughout the rulebooks. I really like this. The setting is extremely varied with tons of room for games with different genres and tone. I like the way they've connected different parts of the world in lore, leaving space for high fantasy, urban fantasy, and sci-fi all in the same universe. Of course, you don't have to play the game in this setting, but I really like that they've added lore to each of the ancestries, careers, and classes, placing them in the setting. Reading through it gave me lots of inspiration, both for things that I'd use exactly as they are, and things I'd change a little. Alright, I think I've given all the players enough reasons to want to try this game. Now let's dive into some of the best features for GMs, and this first one is something you should absolutely steal and bring back to whichever system you play, because it's awesome. By the way, I made a huge list of everything I was excited about after reading through the game, and not everything made it into this video. So I made a second video that's available over on my Patreon at the I Appreciate You tier with some of the more specific things that I really like, both for GMs and for players. So if you're interested in that, it's linked down below. Multiple times, I've found myself in a situation where my players are trying to persuade someone powerful to do something and not really having any way to mechanically resolve it. Either we just resolve it in roleplay, or I have them make persuasion checks, but neither of those felt great. But Draw Steel solves that. They include a whole system for mechanically resolving negotiations, and I think it's really clever. Basically, you make arguments to the person you're negotiating with, trying to avoid their pitfalls and touch on their motivations. You're trying to increase their interest before their patience wears out. The result isn't success or failure either, it's tiered, just like with everything else. The whole chapter is really great and has lots of examples and resources to help GMs implement it into their games. I also really like that it's fully embedded into Draw Steel, and lots of class features and other skills give the players abilities that they can use during a negotiation. It feels like it's one of the pillars of the game, which is really cool. It also encourages your players to do research ahead of time to find out the motivations and pitfalls of the person they're going to negotiate with. It turns this part of D&D I used to find really abstract and difficult to run into a structured and fun part of the game. If you like the idea of giving mechanical structure to an aspect of the game that can be difficult to run, then you're also going to like the next one. It kind of feels like the designers took the idea of skill challenges and just fleshed them out a bit more. A montage challenge is any challenge that is larger in scope and you don't necessarily want to roleplay in real time, but you still want it to have weight in the game. There are lots of examples, but one of my favorites is their burning town example. Basically, there's a fire in the town and the player characters need to help put it out. So how does this work? The GM comes up with a list of challenges that the players will need to overcome. At the start of the challenge, the GM presents the list of challenges to the players, and they each take turns picking a challenge and proposing a skill or ability to resolve it. The results of the individual challenges may interact with other challenges. For example, if you succeed particularly well in one challenge, you may get to add a boon, which is kind of like advantage, to another challenge. The successes and failures of each individual challenge will also have narrative benefits and consequences. The group needs to achieve a certain number of successes before they hit the failure threshold to succeed at the montage challenge. Before we talk about the downtime and crafting systems, which are pretty sweet, I want to show you what they did with magic items. There are two types of magic items in Draw Steel: leveled items and non-leveled items. Non-leveled items are just a standard magic item, but leveled items get different levels of power and abilities when wielded by a character of a certain level. That means they level up with you as your character levels up, which is so cool. They've also done something really fun with the attunement limit, and I'll go over that in the Patreon video. In the treasures section of the book, there's really clear guidance on how many items and which items should be given out during different echelons of play. Echelons of play are like the tiers of play. But if your players don't want to find items, they can also make them themselves. Just as with the other systems in this book, the crafting system is robust and interesting and not just a time and gold cost. You can build pretty much anything from vehicles to magic items. Each project has an item prerequisite that you need to get for the project, a project source, which is like the instructions for how to do it, and it'll often be in a specific language, and a project goal score. Once you have the item prerequisite that you collected on one of your adventures, and you found the project source and translated it if you didn't have the language, you can start making project rolls during your rest time. Making a project roll allows you to advance the project score, and along the way you may get project events that give you boons or challenges. Once the project score meets the project goal, you've finished the project. I love that it brings languages into play because that's often an underused mechanic. But of course, for the players to go out and find project prerequisite items, they're gonna need to face some encounters. Unsurprisingly, considering this game was made by the people that made Flee Mortals, the encounter building system is extremely in-depth and robust. Encounters are balanced by spending encounter value to buy monsters and add them to the combat encounter. Every monster has an EV, an encounter value, as well as a bunch of other attributes that are helpful for building an interesting and balanced encounter, which we'll go over in a second. To figure out how much EV you can spend, you need to determine the party's encounter strength. To do that, you just consult this table. You find the party's level and then the number of PCs in the party. That value is the difficulty of a standard encounter. To make it a hard encounter, just move 3 squares to the right. To make it an extreme encounter, defined as one that your party is unlikely to survive unless they flee, you move right more than 3 squares. And there's a formula given in the book to calculate these numbers, so you can extend the table as much as you want. Now, you take your EV and go shopping for monsters. But there's a lot of different types of monsters that you can buy. Along with an EV, monsters also have a level and an organizational role. The level is extremely simple. Level 1 characters fight level 1 monsters. So easy. There are more details about how far you can stretch that and what the consequences will be, but in general, monster level should match character level. Monsters also have an organizational role, like Ambusher, Brute, Defender, or Solo. These tell you what the monster is tactically good at, and adding combinations of different monster types will lead to more engaging and tactically satisfying encounters. But in this game, encounters aren't just supposed to be about trading blows, they often have other objectives. Some of the most common D&D DM advice on YouTube is to add secondary objectives or alternate objectives to your combat encounters because it'll make them way more fun. So MCDM decided to give GMs a ton of information on exactly how to do that. There's a whole encounter objectives section in the Monsters book with examples. And the examples are extremely detailed, with recommendations for what kind of map would work well, which types of monsters would be best, some example success conditions and failure conditions, and other advice for each each specific scenario. All of this sounds great, right? So we want this game to succeed and stick around, right? Well, for that to happen, the game needs to have a good creator license. Because if third-party publishers aren't making content for the game, it'll dwindle and die. But with a good creator license, this game can flourish. And from my non-lawyer perspective, I think it has a fair license. The biggest green flag for me is they're attaching the license version to the content version. As I understand it, if you make work for their game and they release a new edition of the game with a new license, you can keep making and updating your work under the old license for the previous edition of the game. You only need to agree to the new license if you want to use the new content. The other cool thing is that you can use anything in the game except the art, meaning you can use and build on the lore, use the monster names, and anything else. This is where I think Critical Role and Daggerheart had a big misstep, and I sincerely hope that they listen to the community and make changes. We're past the era of just trust us, we probably won't enforce it. Unfortunately, Wizards of the Coast saw to that. I think the Daggerheart system is really cool, and we've been talking about it on the podcast, which is linked down below. I want to see it succeed as well, but for that to happen, I think they're going to need to update their license. Okay, tiny rant over. This video is not about Daggerheart. But what about that reason that you shouldn't try this game? This game is designed to be tactical. It's one of the words that design philosophy is based around. So if you feel that 5e is already more tactical than you'd like, or you exclusively play Theater of the Mind, then I think there are better games out there for you. But if you like the level of crunch in 5e and would perhaps like a little bit more without sacrificing the narrative elements of the game, then I think you're gonna really enjoy Draw Steel. Are you as excited as I am about this game? Do you want to learn more? You can check out the video on my Patreon to hear the rest of the things on my list. What are you most excited for about Draw Steel? Let me know down in the comments. And if you want to learn about some leveled magic items that you can bring into D&D, check out this video here. I appreciate you.